So hello, as I've been introduced, my name's Billy Smallwood and I'm the Clinical Director at WitherslackGroup. And I've been asked today if I'd present on understanding and managing challenging behaviours in neurodivergent children. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time in this session thinking about what neurodivergence is and what is neurodiversity. I'm aware that there may be many experts of you out there, but I think if we can all start from the same positioning, if you like, that might help us when we're thinking further about challenging behaviours and how we also understand those. I'm going to be thinking about how we can manage challenging behaviours through a neuro-affirming approach. And then at the end of the session, as has been said, there will be an opportunity for some reflections and questions. So neurodiversity. What is that? Well, it highlights the idea that there's no one right way to think, learn, behave, or feel. We are all different in the way that our human brains work, and no one is better than the other. It's a term that was coined initially by a lady called Judy Singer in the 90s, and it points to our uniqueness, really, how we are unique in our thinking, in the way that we view things, or the way that we function in the world around us and the people we are connecting with. So it's a colourful diversity of human minds with infinite variations of how we are neurocognitive functioning. And a neurotype is, it tries to capture the many different types of ways that our brain may work. And it's usually referring to the way, as I said earlier, that we respond to things around us. So the social and sensory information that we observe, that we see, that we hear, that we feel. And the sort of figures suggest that there's between 15 to 20% of the population who would be described as neurodivergent, meaning that the sort of other 80% would be neurotypical. But I think we can be a little bit skeptical about this neurotypical word, because as we've just said, we all are different in many ways. And so we all need to be thoughtful about what works for us and how we perceive things. So one of the problems, I think, with neurotypical and neurodiversity is that to date, and still very often, it becomes a medicalized matter. So it's seen as something that needs to be treated. So it's a bit like I'm Billy and I have a cold, and my cold needs to be somehow sorted out and got rid of. So I'm Billy and I have autism. It's as if somehow we've got to sort out the autism. But that's not how we should be thinking. And diagnosis that can be very helpful to people should be helpful in that it alerts us, it raises an awareness to the type of support that may be required by an individual. So there are many, many neurotypes, and we've just captured a few here. Some of them you may be very familiar with, some of them may seem very new to you, and some of them seem very strange in their wordings. But it's the point of sharing this really is that there are multiple ways that we can be neurodiverse, and multiple ways that we can think about how we may be different and how we present and perceive things around us. So as I mentioned earlier, if we're going to be thinking of who we are and how different we can all be, I think this quote is really helpful in kind of positioning how we view neurodiversity. So autism isn't something a person has or a shell that a person is trapped inside. There's no normal child hidden behind the autism. Autism is a way of being. It is pervasive. It colours every experience, every sensation, perception, thought, emotion, and encounter, every aspect of existence. It is not possible to separate the autism from the person. And if it were possible, the person you have left would not be the same person you started with. So I think that really kind of puts in perspective how we need to view ourselves as a whole. And then that sort of thinking helps us think about how we talk, the language we use. And it's really important for each of us to talk to each other and understand how we would all like to be referred to and referenced. But more commonly now, we tend to, people wish to be identified first, their identity first. So it's not a person with autism, as I said, it's not a person with a cold. It's, I am autistic. It is all of me. It is everything about me. And it is everything about how I will engage and connect with you and the world around me. And language is really important. And the way we think about neurodivergence is important because it can help us to listen, it can help us to understand, and that's vital for helping us support the children, young people, and each other. And it means that we know that neurodiversity is all around us and affects many of us. And we need to create supportive environments for each other and for our children in particular, so that they can build their own positive self-image and make the most of their life opportunities. So when we think about neurodiversity and some of the differences, we tend to capture these within 4 areas: sensory processing, thinking and information processing, communication, and social interaction. So what's sensory processing? What do we mean by that? Well, when we think about this, this is about how we recognize and understand information that comes through our senses. And there are 8 senses, and each of them will be bringing information into us to process and to think about. So that's what we see, what we hear, what we might taste, what we might smell, our proprioception, our body positioning, how we have a sense of how we position ourselves, our vestibular sense, our head position, which thinks about speed of things. It helps us think about direction, touch, and about our internal perceptions of things, our gut feelings, you know, the feelings inside us, our kind of unconscious processes, our interoception. And each of us may be hypo or hyper sensitive to each of those senses. So we may be oversensitive in some areas or undersensitive in some areas, and a combination of each for many of us. So imagine if you were an autistic person, if you have a difference in how you are, your sensory sensitivities, things will be perceived and experienced by you very differently to another person, for example. So ringing of a bell may be just a ring in a bell for some of us. But for some people, it may be like someone screaming in your ear. Somebody may be oversensitive to that level of noise. Standing in line, something we do all the time, waiting for the bus, queuing for things. For some of us and some of our children, that may be super high alert moment because you are very worried that somebody may brush past you and you're oversensitive to touch. And so somebody brushing past can be experienced as highly painful. Getting dressed might be hard because you can't balance, or you can't see your hands when they're inside your jumper, or you struggle to sit still because you need to move. So different ways of how we experience the sensory things that come into our body will make us respond differently. Me listening to a bell and it's someone screaming in my ear is going to create a certain reaction in me. Thinking and information processing. So how we are able to think about information, how we can understand that information, how we might organize information, how we regulate our emotions, how we might learn things, and the sorts of interests that we might have are all about the way we process, the way we think. So for some children, they may need support to organize their thoughts and manage what we would call executive functioning, the way that we plan. It's a kind of a level of thinking that we would organize diaries with, we would plan an activity, we would plan our day, for example, or a trip out. For some children who process information differently, that can be very challenging. So imagine that you're an air traffic controller And all of this information, all these planes are flying around, and you've got to sort out which one can land first, which one can come second, what's the time difference between them so they land safely. Some people will find that activity something to be thought about, they can process it, they can manage it, and achieve a kind of a game plan. For others, the idea of that would be overwhelming. And so information coming in would be very hard to sequence, to organize, and it can be like a soup, a mess. Someone's experience in the world is completely overwhelming. Communication differences, how we understand language, how we use language, how we think about what people are saying to us. Can we think in metaphor? Can we think in symbols? How we experience somebody's tone of voice, their accent. We all have different ways of communicating. So for some people, small talk is of not interest to them. It's not something they wish to engage in. Some people speak in a very forthright, clear manner. Some people are not concerned with how their communication is received. They're not feeling concerned about social approval from others. Some people are very detailed in what they wish to communicate. And some people will experience a sensory overload by the mere conversations with people, too many people talking at once, too many words in one sentence, or indeed too many words. And then the other difference, main difference, tends to be around how we interact with others, how we engage with others, what motivates us or doesn't motivate us to connect with other people. Do we wish to play alone, play with other people? Are we interested in friendships? Are we keen to get to know people and their personalities, or do we connect purely through a shared interest? Can we start and finish a conversation? Have we the ability to engage in resolving conflict with others? Are we able to understand how others may perceive a situation so we can find a way forward? And all of us will have different ways of self-regulation. So at times when things become overwhelming, how do we cope with that? How do we regulate? Some of us need to be alone. Some of us need to be with others. Some of us need to be calm. Some of us need to be running around. So how we cope with our differences, and when our differences are being challenged, the way we cope with that will also be different. So when we're thinking about behaviour and when it becomes challenging, so behaviour can be described as challenging when it is of such an intensity, frequency or duration as to threaten the quality of life and or the physical safety of the individual or others, and is likely to lead to responses that are restrictive, aversive, or result in exclusion. And what we've described earlier, though, is how all of our behaviours are very, very different. And how people understand our behaviours is very important, so that we don't always, our behaviour doesn't always be perceived as a challenge that needs to be taken away, that needs to be restricted, but it needs to be understood. So challenging behaviour can often be perceived as a problem to be treated. And what we've heard about earlier is how sometimes our neurodiversity is seen as a problem to be treated. And I think there's a connection there. If we are unable to understand someone's neurotype, we are more likely to see their behaviour as a problem and something that needs to be treated or stopped. But if we see the problem in the world around the child as opposed to the child, we will have a better clue and a better hope of being able to support them, so that the challenging behaviour or the behaviour does not become challenging to the point where it is of the intensity, frequency that needs a response, such as a restriction or an exclusion of it. Because this is what normally happens, doesn't it? I don't know if anybody here is recognising any of these terms about their child, or indeed about themselves perhaps when they were growing up, but how some of the children's presentations, how their ways of coping or differences or how they are when they become overwhelmed and dysregulated because the environment is overwhelming, when the bell goes off and it's painful to listen to, when they're standing in the lunch queue and they're very anxious about being touched. Often what's perceived is their behaviour, and it's a problem. They're upset with children. They're not very good at making friends. They don't listen to my instructions. They don't take part in lunch. They are always aggressive. So very quickly, a child's overwhelmed sense of being overwhelmed can be perceived as a problem and behaviours that may challenge. And that can lead, at the end of the route, to a child being quite traumatised. So a repeated exposure to sensory triggers can lead to anxiety, stress, and trauma. Anxiety is a natural response to a perceived threat or stress. And what we do when we perceive a threat is our arousal levels go up, and we often will respond with a flight, fight, or freeze response. Those responses are perceived as challenging behaviours. The child runs away, the child withdraws, the child hits out, the child doesn't respond, shuts off, cuts down, doesn't speak, doesn't communicate. But what we're seeing then is how our inability to understand a child can lead to behaviours in themselves, and can also lead to a very traumatised and distressed child. So there's actually some significantly strong links between perhaps an autistic child or a neurodiverse child and developmental trauma, because of how they experience the world around them, and how their experiences and their lack of understanding and adaptations to how they experience the world around them can lead to them being constantly in a state of high emotional arousal, experiencing the world as a threat and responding to that. So we want to try and think about our children and think about our response to behaviours and how they present with neuroaffirming practice. And neuroaffirming practice has a goal of trying to embrace the uniqueness and strengths of neurodivergent children and provide them and their families with the skills, tools and strategies to allow for improved participation within the home, school and play. So it's about trying to celebrate uniqueness and then working with that uniqueness to enable the world around them to allow for the differences and allow them to fully participate. It moves away from the idea of centering the problem in the person, but in adapting their environments to improve and support quality of life and positive outcomes. And I love the quote here by Paul Collins, that the problem with pounding a square peg into a round hole is not that the hammering is hard work, it's that you're destroying the peg. And the more we try and see our children's neurodiversity as a problem, and we try and take it away and smash them into the place we think they ought to be, the neurotypical slot, if you like, the more we're going to destroy them. And as we remember from the quote earlier, I'm not a person hiding behind all my presentations. It's who I am. And if we're trying to change that, we're going to be trying to take the very nature of that person away. So one of the ways we can think about how we support children is to use the PACE approach, which I'm sure some of you have experienced before, some of you are very familiar with. But this is around playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And the PACE approach can help us get to know our children, which is why I've brought it into this presentation today, because it's a way of saying, how do we get to know you in a way that is not with judgment, that thinks about how we can understand your behaviour as a communication. It encourages us to be curious, to wonder about the child, to wonder about events and the situation. it allows us to try and engage with the child, to understand their points of view, how they see the world, to reflect on things behind what we see. And it also enables us to engage with the child through empathy, to try and step inside their shoes. So if that's your sensitivity, how might you experience that standing in the queue? And I wonder how I can help you find a situation where you can queue up for your lunch or engage in the lunchtime that is different. So pace can be really helpful in prompting us to really get to know our children and the children that we live and learn with, and children and how they perceive the world, to step into their shoes and use that knowledge to think about how we may respond and adapt to some of their sensory differences, or their differences, sorry. Because what we need to do is reframe the behaviours. And that's about our mindset. That's about our view of the child, how we think about that child and what they're doing, how we respond, and then how the child experiences us and the world around us. So we're moving from the child won't, a position of judgment, to that pace position of being curious as to why can't the child? Is it because the judgment would say that it's because they're just being defiant, they're just winding me up, they're just being naughty? Or the curious position is, I wonder what it is that's very different, that is difficult, that is stressful. Is it to do with some sensory difference? Is it to do with the way they're understanding something differently? And then we want to think about what we can do about that. How can we help remove those barriers? How can we respond in a helpful way? And ultimately enable the child to experience things feeling supported and strengthened, rather than becoming more frustrated, perhaps feeling shamed and guilty, which will perpetuate, as we know, behaviours that can be difficult. So we're going to think about some strategies to address behaviour, and some of the kind of core things we might want to think about is how we adopt a strengths-based approach, how we understand and adjust the environments, how we might teach emotion regulation skills, provide clear and consistent expectations, how we might offer choices and autonomy, how we might use positive reinforcement, and how we collaborate with others around us. So going back, just to remember that we've got potentially 4 areas of difference that each of somebody with a different neurotype may have. So let's think about our environment for a minute. One of the things about the environment is it's a way to think about the physical environment and the social environment around us, the world around the child, and how we can structure that to be most helpful. One of the ways that we think about children at WitherslackGroup is to think about children through a developmental process. And it's not just how we think about children, it's how we think about people. And one of the things that we know about all of us is that we kind of function on a hierarchy. And the first position that we function, or need to be, if you like, is in a position of felt safety. So we need to believe that we are safe. We're safe physically and emotionally. And it's not until we actually feel safe that we can begin to relate to the other people around us and begin to make connections and relationships. And then we know that it's not until we begin to make relationships and connections that we may be able to start to access things around us, such as learning and social opportunities. And then unless we can access those opportunities, we know we're not going to achieve our full potential. So what is key in all of the things we're talking about today is how we can help our children feel that felt sense of safety. And that will permeate through all the things that we're going to talk about now. How can we create a safe environment for our children? Now, one of the things about the environment that we know can help it feel safe is if it is predictable and organised. So We have routine. We know that structured environments can help us be more efficient because, as I say, we know the environment, we know how to be in it, we know how to move around it, to find the things we need. Environments need to promote positive social connections. So they need to be mindful about how we can support children to be in their environment in a safe way, so they can begin to make those connections. And they've got to be child-centered. They've got to be linked to the needs of our children. So routine and expectations can help promote a sense of safety, something that's predictable and consistent. If there's a lack of structure or lots of changes in routine and the things around us, that can become overwhelming. So we need clear routines to help foster independence, feelings of safety, and a sense of self. And if we think about just how we operate, a lot of us will create routine and have expectations of ourselves automatically. We usually, each of us have some kind of morning routine. There are things we do on a regular basis. I always have to have my go-to cup of coffee before I do this, before I do that. We have nighttime routines. It may be drawing in the house. It may be settling in, turning the lights down. It may be our sort of hygiene routines. We create routines, and that gives us a sense of pacing ourselves. We know what to expect. Routines and expectations are really important for our children, so they don't become overwhelmed. They don't become overwhelmed with sudden changes, with things that they cannot predict. When our children have things they can't predict, they can become overwhelmed quickly, and then the children can become very dysregulated and start to present challenges, behaviours that challenge us. We can think about things in our environment that can support. So visual supports to back up verbal information. We spoke earlier about how children can receive information differently. Different neurotypes communicate differently. How they process information can be different. So supplying lots of ways, getting to know what our preferred ways of receiving information for our children is. So for some of our children, visual supports can be really helpful and important. Clearly defined areas for different activities, helping children become familiar with what happens where in what spaces, what happens within the bedroom area, what happens within the living area, the play areas, what can they expect to go on for them, what can they expect to be able to do in a safe environment. It's organised spaces. We spoke earlier about how too much information, too much sensory overload, too much around us can become overwhelming. So keeping spaces organised, keeping things, resources in accessible ways, but in bite-sized chunks, can again be really helpful. So one of the things that can become very overwhelming for some neurotypes is demands. And this isn't just about when I demand you to do something. Demands come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them will be about what others expect of us, but some will be about too many choices. We demand you to make a choice. We demand you to do this. We demand you to be here then. They all can be experienced as demands by our children. So our environments can be very demanding. What we expect of children can be very demanding. So sometimes it really helps to think about all those very different demands that we will place on children and how they can become very overwhelming very quickly. So we've got to weigh up our demands with the children's ability to tolerate those. And again, this all goes back to getting to know the child, getting to know what their levels of tolerance are. How much can they tolerate, that window of tolerance, before they become overwhelmed? So can we minimize rules? Do we need so many? Are there situations that we can enable some choice, give control to our children, appropriate control, before perhaps they feel the the urge to take control because they're feeling so overwhelmed. Can we keep the child at the centre of our demands? Is this really needed for them at this point, or is this something about us and making things easy for us? And if it is, can we do it in a different way? Can we help children understand the demands? Can they make sense? If we can't explain or they don't make sense, we really shouldn't be making them. And something about how we pick our battles and how we have to go without some of our demands being met. We need to accept that some things just can't be. Can we adapt the approach we have with children? A lot of the ways we help children manage their behaviours is by the things we do. What can we do differently? How can we engage with them differently? How can we ensure that we are being flexible, that we are responding to what their needs are, to how they communicate, to what we know about them? How much information can they accept at one point? How many words can I use at one point? And trying to change and adapt our approaches to the children is critical. We mentioned about understanding and being understood, and that's what effective communication is all about. And it must never be underestimated. Communication is key, isn't it, to how we connect with others. Whatever that communication method it's how we get our voice heard. It's how we express our feelings. It's how we get our frustrations, our anxieties, how we share them, how we communicate those. So think about the language that we use. We keep language simple sentences, simple words. Can we make instructions short and clear? Can we use visuals to support the language we use? Can we try not to ask too many questions? Maybe we could just make a comment or an observation. Can we use positive language? And importantly, can we avoid sarcasm or idioms? We've noted earlier that some neurotypes find it very difficult to think in symbols, to think in metaphor. So are they necessary? When we think about how we can respond and adapt our environment, we should think about how we can make it helpful for everybody. Because actually, keeping language simple, using simple sentences, not over communicating, not using too many words is really helpful to me as a person. And I'd suggest helpful to 100% of us, actually. And a lot of how we might respond to the different differences in people will mean that the world is a better and easier place for everybody to be part of. Again, thinking about visuals, thinking about prompts, thinking about how we can make the world and the environment around predictable. Can we time things? Can we give children things to be helping them process, to think about time, to think about distance? Can we think about repeating information, using the same words? And again, one of the things that we find when a child is communicating stress or there is a tension in the environment, often what we hear is the grown-ups around increase the words they use, when actually what would be most helpful is to avoid verbal language at all, to try and calm the situation rather than create more anxiety with more words. Can we think about, again, the sensitivities when we're interacting with children? I think I still hear people being asked to, what's the phrase? Look at me when I'm talking to you. Why? Why would we wish that to be the case if that's going to cause distress in the other person, if that's going to heightening anxiety, if that's going to increase the risk of somebody becoming overwhelmed and dysregulated, and increase the risk of someone responding with a fight, flight, or freeze response. Can we get to know a child's interest and support the positive relationships through those interests? How can we value the person's wishes in terms of friendships? So the kind of comment we heard earlier about they don't seem to make friends. Can we respect that? If a child chooses that at this point in time in their development, they wish to spend more time alone, can we allow that to be? Can we think about the messages that children are receiving from us and how they will perceive us? So too many words or not enough words. Can we think about the different ways that they will view us and the things we say? Allowing children to play alone, allowing children to play in their own environments with the rest of the world cut off from them. All helpful things for our children to help them manage their differences. And I think key to all this is stop saying no. It's a bit like the demands. And on average, I think most children, the average young person, will hear the word no around 400 times a day, which is quite a shocking amount when you think about it. And it's stressful for the grown-ups around, and certainly for the children, because no is negative. It creates a really negative environment and it patterns our thinking. It doesn't help us do that reframing of behaviour if all we're doing is saying, you've got to stop that. No, you can't. No, I won't. It doesn't help create an environment of positivity. It doesn't help recognise differences. It doesn't help reduce demands. It doesn't help engagement. So how can we stop using the word no when actually we mean no? We don't want something to be going on. How can we make an alternative to that no demand? So we can think about how we structure our responses. We can think about alternative ways of saying instructions. We can think about maybe do we ask for help from a child rather than go and do? Can we say what we want the child to do rather than what we'd want them not to do? Can we offer choices as alternatives to instructions? Again, rather than a demand, can we give some option here? Can we give some of the power, the control back? Can we avoid trigger words? Can we think about how we can use distraction and turn things into a game? Can we model what we want in the child? Can we show them how it is more helpful to be, rather than just say, don't be like that? So can we use the word yes much more than the word no? So when a child comes up to us and says something like, can I be with you now? Can you spend time with me now? Rather than say, no, I've got to go and do this, perhaps we can say, yes, I just need to finish what I'm doing. And yes, I can be with you then. Can we think about not saying some of those trigger words? Not now, don't, can't, no. Words that are really difficult, that are quite rejecting to a child, that can create shame, that can create guilt, that can be telling a child that you don't wish to be connecting with them, that you are not interested in them. Can we be positive in the response, even though it may not be in the moment that we're responding? For some of our children, we know that praise can be very difficult and in itself can be quite a trigger. And again, can we think of how we might indirectly praise a child rather than them themselves, which seems to be the bit that is quite difficult for some people with sort of social interaction differences. So what a wonderfully tidy room, rather than you have done such a good job tidying this room. Because for some children, as we mentioned earlier, praise can feel like a demand. So they've got to be better next time. It's got to be like this all the time. They have got to be perfect. So again, thinking about how a child understands us, how they see and receive our communications, what their areas of sensory, of information differences are, and how we can respond to them as an individual. Key to all of this is about the relationships that we develop with our children. The way we manage behaviour ultimately is about how we have a relationship with the children, how we can stay curious and open to each of their experiences and their preferences. How can we understand each child's way of experiencing the world and how we know it's unique to them, how we get to know their interests, their needs and ambitions, using that PACE model earlier to really be curious about the children. Knowing that the way that we can support the child has to be individualised, it has to be bespoke, how it has to involve showing care, understanding, and trying to see the world through their eyes, putting on their glasses, so their prescription. Wearing my prescription means I want the letters to look a bit bold or a little bit bigger. But if I put the child's glasses on and looked through the prescription they have of the world, what do they need? How are they seeing what's in front of them? And how can I hold that in mind when I'm connecting to them, when I'm relating to them, when I'm trying to help them navigate the world around them and access safety so they can access relationships and living and learning opportunities. And that means we have to be flexible, we have to be creative, we have to be persistent and resilient. What we know is some things will work one day and not another, and we will not know what the difference was, but we stay with it. We can't go on automatic pilot. This is active engagement with children. It's about being collaborative with children and the others around us. And what's really important is that we do all of that for ourselves. So can we be curious and open to what we're experiencing at that point in time? How can we stay regulated? How can we stay empathic? So we have to be really mindful about our own emotions when we're alongside children who are displaying behaviours that may challenge us or becoming anxious and overwhelmed and are beginning to respond in fight and flight. How do we stay calm enough, stay thoughtful and mindful enough to respond to what they're presenting with? Okay, thank you. That's my presentation, and I think there may be an opportunity for you to pass on any reflections of that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Billy. That was absolutely brilliant. There's been loads of questions and comments coming in. So we've got 15 minutes. We'll just try and get through as many as we can.
So I'm going to stop sharing. Is that?
Yeah, you can stop sharing if you'd like. You can, yeah, perfect. That's great. Okay, so the first question is, I'd like to know how to promote good behaviour with my 7-year-old. With my older children, we would use the naughty step, but I don't think this is right for him. He's autistic, and a typical situation is an argument escalating and pushing or kicking his younger sister, and then having a smile on his face when I tell him off. However, I know this isn't intentional. So the question's around promoting good behaviour.
Yeah, I think trying to hold onto some of the principles that we've spoken about today really is, it sounds as if you've already been doing that. You know the smile isn't because he's being rude or cheeky. You know, sorry, I'm just, have I frozen to you?
No, you're perfect, yeah.
Sorry, I've just got something coming on my screen which is making it, that's better. Okay, sorry, I'd frozen to myself and I was a little nervous. Is so getting to know, perhaps trying to understand what it is that's being communicated between your child and his siblings, and trying to be proactive around that. Is it that actually they're wanting to connect, they're wanting a bit more time? Are they wanting to be friends? Are they wanting to be playful? And then trying to, so if we can understand what the intent is, really, if we go back to thinking that every sort of behaviour is a communication, we need to try and find what is being communicated. And that would be the challenge, I think, really. What is being communicated from one child to the other? And then thinking about other ways that we can meet meet that need or meet that wish, that desire, so that it doesn't turn into a kick under the table or what it might be. And that might be verbalizing it. It might be, thinking about that a little bit with the child, maybe thinking about that with the other sibling, about how they experience it, how they understand it. But being open and through that kind of pace model is where my starting point would be.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Billy. The next question is, how do we manage outbursts? My son is bigger than me and at times has been quite intimidating. He tends to continue on and on until he gets his own way.
Yeah, and that can be really quite scary, can't it? And this is, I think, really where looking after oneself is critical. I mean, safety is paramount. So let me just start there. Maintaining safety for you and your child has got to be the first thing to be thoughtful about. So if there is an actual threat or actual kind of physical connection in some way, then clearly the thing to do is to make space, create safety for you if possible. And I think then something about how you try and stay regulated yourself. Finding ways that you may be able to contain your anxiety, finding ways of supporting yourself after such an event, reflecting on the event with other people around you, gaining support from others, whether that's friends and family or indeed professionals, seeking help around helping you understand what's happening at those times. I think, again, I'd go back to some of the things we'd spoken about in the presentation. Is there a way of understanding what the triggers are here? What are the things that triggered this interaction in particular? And then in the moment, trying to take away some of the things that you know might be perpetuating that situation. So if the situation has become very tense, lots of shouting, maybe some bashing around, the child feels very dysregulated, is there a way where we can start to reduce the stimuli around at that point in time? Can we reduce the noise around? Can we think about the environment? Can we think about using less words? Is it about trying to reduce yourself as a threat? Is your child feeling overwhelming and anxious that they're actually perceiving you and everything around them as a threat? Can you do anything with your body, with the way you're presenting, to reduce that perception in the moment? And are there things that you know work to help regulate your child? Are there things that help soothe them? Do you know if they have a weighted toy, a blanket? Is there an activity that soothes them? Does music help? Does counting help? Does singing help? Touch? All of the different strategies that you may know help your child when they are, in a much calmer state. Can you bring those into this situation to try and lower the kind of intensity of it and the overload at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Billy. Next question is, changing the environment to help my 6-year-old child is very insightful and surely useful, but I am worried that if I change it too much, he's not prepared for the real world where stimulus are everywhere and people are not sensitive to his difficulties. Have you got any suggestions about this?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? And I guess we're not going to change the whole world. Although, as I said, if we change the whole world to recognise that we're all different, then it would be a nicer place for all of us, I think. But that's not going to happen, as we know. I think I would encourage you to still adapt the environment in the home space for your child, because at least then your child has a place to return to that doesn't feel as potentially overwhelming as all the other places that they have to be in and exist in. So you are kind of reducing the stimuli, allowing time for the child to have respite, if you like. So we know our children will learn to adapt. We will try and teach them strategies to manage the overstimulus in the world around them, to manage in school in different ways. And so they will be working really hard. Most of the time they're at school, most of the time they're in a social setting. And I guess by them coming home to a place that has been adapted by you, we can enable them to relax, to regroup, if you like, to regain some energy, to not have to work so hard. So I would still encourage you, you know, to provide that safe, calming space for them to have some respite from the rest of the world.
Yeah, brilliant answer. Thank you, Billy. Next question is, we have the same routine every day, brackets morning, but I still have to ask my son multiple times to get ready. How can I make this easier? Is it by me asking him multiple times that it's actually making things worse?
Possibly. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you've got to get to school, or you've got to go somewhere, or what have you. And, you know, as we said in the session, demand, 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 nag, 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 can be triggering in itself. So I think you're right to ask the question. I don't know if you've tried any visual supports. I don't know if you've tried timers, for example. So rather than you nag, can you set some multiple alarms? Can you turn it into a fun thing? So right, but the challenge today is, can we do our teeth in the 2 minutes before the you know, as the timer goes off? See if we can time it ourselves. Right, so yesterday we got dressed in 3 minutes. Today we're going to try and do it in 2.5. Is there a way you can turn it into a less stressful experience for you and your child? A way that kind of, if we think about pace, we bring in a bit of playfulness around it. We lighten the morning. I bet you both dread mornings. I bet, you know, it's that nagging time. Can we bring a lightness to it? Can we make it into a game? Can we use visuals? Can we use timers that do the nagging rather than you? Can you do anything proactively? Is there anything you can do the night before to prepare? Do we do things like lay out the uniform with a visual that says pants and socks first, or, you know, and that sort of thing? Can we make that into a joke? Can we try and put our socks on after our you know, is there ways we can lighten that important routine? Because it sounds as if it's become a really stuck part of the day that's pretty miserable. And if you both start that day off feeling miserable, I'm sure it's not a great start.
Yeah, brilliant answer. Thank you again. Next question is, how can I best support a child in my care who is on the pathway to ADHD diagnosis? He can go from being calm and talking. He can go from being calm and talking to chaotically manic and hysterical with not much warning or clear triggers.
I think it's, again, it's I mean, I hear there are no clear triggers, and yet I imagine there might be. They're just not clear to see. So again, I would stay very curious to see if you can keep working out what those triggers might be. And I would also try, and even though we don't know them, I would probably generalize a little bit here, having spent the whole sort of session talking about uniqueness. I would think I would generalize as a starting point here if I can't see what the unique triggers are. And I would do a bit of a health check on what's happening. Is the environment as predictable as it could be? Are there things that I know can help calm my child, and are they at the ready? Do I know some of the things that can help in those moments, and don't I? How then, when the child may become, you know, go to 0 to 0, or sorry, 0 to 100, and maybe they're up there, they're dysregulated, how can I reduce, again, the tension at that moment? What is it I know that helps that child to calm again? Is it touch? Is it connection? Is it some of the soothing toys? Is it nothing, actually? Is it, if it's in a safe environment, is it about letting the child run around? Is it about predicting that before this moment the child needs this? So I think there's no quick answers, But I think it is just staying with asking those questions. What's made the difference? What has gone on? And if it's still something I don't think I can be proactive to, is there some things I can do to help calm the child in that moment?
Yeah, we actually have a podcast from our behaviour team on that, so I'll try and get that over to the parent who's asked that question. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next question is, my granddaughter often scratches or bites her mum when she has to transition between activities, or if an activity needs to come to an end. She has a diagnosis of ASD with associated language difficulties. She's 5 in November, really worried about the school transition. Any suggestions would be gratefully received.
Yeah, lots of proactive to help make the situation predictable. So if we're thinking about, you've identified it's something about transitions, it's something about changing from one activity to another, and you've got a big change coming up for her in terms of school. So how can we make the moment of the change much more predictable? How can we bring it forward? So this is an example where kind of now and next kind of visuals might help, where now we're going to be doing this, and next we're going to be doing this, and you're preparing the child for the next. Your timers, again, may help a child prepare for an ending and prepare for a new start. You might want to put something in that middle position, in that transition time, so that there is something that helps the child transition from one to another, rather than what feels as if she's taking her mother as part of that transition and making that connection, and it's an unhelpful connection for everybody, isn't it? So is there something you can put in place of that to help that transition go through? You know it's going to happen, you can predict it, you're telling us it happens, you've predicted it, so what can we put in place in that moment as an alternative for her to be driven to that particular behaviour? And in terms of the big school, the more you can proactively prepare, and again, I would say, Jodie, I think we've done some help leaflets on preparing your child for school transitions somewhere as well, I think. So again, that might be something we can provide to the audience today.
Yeah, we'll try and dig those out, definitely. And then I think we've got time for one final question. I think a lot of our parents will relate to this one. Do you have any advice on how to explain all this to schools? My child is autistic, and schools seem to approach everything with blame and punishment rather than curiosity. I feel like I'm constantly having to fight against their systems to get my child's needs at school to be understood.
It's really difficult, isn't it? Yes. Well, we need to bring them on trainings like this, don't we? And you know, and offer trainings to them. I mean, I'm hopeful in that situations are changing, in that I think there is a greater understanding in a lot of schools, and there's still a long way to go. So I can kind of have complete empathy with what, you know, parents are feeling there. I think all you can do really is to try and help your child's teacher and support staff know your child, because I don't think they're going to have time to get to know 30 children in a class and all their uniqueness, but you do. And I think finding opportunities for you to share what works for your child with those teachers is going to be very helpful for them, and hopefully they'll see the benefits in listening to you, because what we should see, if they are hearing what you're saying as potential triggers and hearing what you're saying as things that can help your child settle in the class, listen, stay focused, then actually that's going to make their lesson an awful lot better for everybody. So there's an investment there, there's a win-win for them to engage with you in those conversations. So finding a way of communicating who your child is, everything about them, their uniqueness, to that teacher is going to be helpful. So some of you might be able to have conversations Some of you might have documents or visuals that help your child that you would share. Some of you might be able to write, I don't know, the 10 things about me page that you might want to share with a teacher. So really communicating as best you can about who your child is and what's unique to them, I think is the only way forward. And let's hope schools begin to realise that, you know, neurodiversity is something that is part of what they should be mindful of when they're thinking about teaching.
Yeah, someone's just put in the chat, some schools have a young person passport,
Yeah.
keyboard points for adults. That's a brilliant idea as well.
Yeah, and if they don't, you can create your own and give
Yeah.
it to the teacher.